Tonight at 10, no spending cuts, says the Prime Minister, and no reversing the massive package of tax reductions.
Have you wrecked the economy, Prime Minister? Time for another U-turn? Is it all going to
By
plan?
pushing ahead with the strategy, experts say that borrowing will have to rise, which explains the Prime Minister's talk of repaying debt in the medium term.
What we will make sure is that over the medium term, the debt is falling. But we will do that not by cutting public spending, but by making sure we spend public money well.
Does she think the public will ever forgive the Conservative Party if they keep on defending this madness and go ahead with a kamikaze budget?
And as Liz Truss arrived for her weekly audience tonight, the King greeted her with, "Dear, oh dear."
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Dear, oh dear. Anyway, no, I never know.
We'll have the latest on the government's economic strategy and the hard questions being asked, also tonight. A court is told that a nurse accused of the murder of 7 babies sent a sympathy card to the parents of one of her victims. Blood supplies in England are at a critically low level. The NHS says that staffing shortages are mainly to blame.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, one of English rugby's most famous names is suspended from the Premiership. Wasps on the verge of administration.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has insisted she will not cut public spending to pay for a multi-billion-pound package of tax cuts. Experts say that the implication is that government borrowing will be allowed to rise further over the next few years. Labour said that was a kamikaze approach, which would not restore confidence in the financial markets. One group of independent experts at the Institute of Fiscal Studies warned that, alternatively, spending cuts of more than £60 billion would be needed to bring public finances under control. Well, at her first Prime Minister's question since that highly controversial mini-budget, Liz Truss told MPs that her strategy of cutting tax would not be changing. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has this report.
Have you wrecked the economy, Prime Minister?
There are plenty of questions for Liz Truss at the moment, but that one gets to the crux of things. Spiralling prices, interest rates climbing, the markets wobbling, and her backbenchers too. Quite the backdrop for her second outing at Prime Minister's Question Time. Given the government's central challenge right now is proving the numbers add up, it was this exchange today that stood out.
During her leadership contest, the Prime Minister said, and I quote her exactly, "I'm very clear. I'm not planning public spending reductions." Is she going to stick to that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are spending almost £1 trillion of public spending. We were spending 700 billion back in 2010. What we will make sure is that over the medium term, the debt is falling. But we will do that not by cutting public spending, but by making sure we spend public money well.
So let's try to work out what that means. Some have said that ministers either have to junk those tax cuts announced a few weeks ago, or have to announce massive spending cuts to be seen to be credible. The government says it's not going to do either and isn't explaining how that is possible. One way may be that they include the big extra help being offered for energy bills as part of government spending and still make cuts elsewhere.
We have taken decisive action to make sure that people are not facing energy bills of £6,000 for 2 years.
Labour wanted to return to Liz Truss's tax cuts.
Who voted for this? Not even most of the MPs behind her who know you can't pay for tax cuts on the never, never. Does she think the public will ever forgive the Conservative Party if they keep on defending this madness?
And this senior Conservative backbencher who backed Rishi Sunak for Prime Minister is sceptical too.
There are many, myself included, who believe that it is quite possible that he will simply have to come forward with a further rowing back on the tax announcements.
And remember, the reason the government says it's doing all of this is to turbocharge the economy. But one economic group told MPs that's not going to happen anytime soon.
We're not going to hit medium-term 2.5% growth in this economy at the moment. This is something that's going to have to be nurtured, as I've said to this committee a number of times, over decades.
Tonight, Liz Truss saw the King for the Prime Minister's usual weekly chat or audience. Take a listen to their pleasantries.
Your Majesty, lovely to see you again.
Back again.
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Oh dear. Anyway, no.
Dear, oh dear, says the King. To what could he possibly have been referring? I'm told that perhaps it's something of a verbal tic of his to try and move the conversation on. We'll never know, of course, because the camera stopped a few seconds later and that most discreet of conversations began. What was rather less discreet, a conversation between the Prime Minister and her backbenchers a little earlier on, where amongst the grumbles, some concerned that her outlook favours the rich over the poor, others saying their outlook has spooked the market. Where the government finds itself tonight is down something of a cul-de-sac inadvertently, which it doesn't want to reverse out of. Now, of course, it hopes that in the end it turns out not to be a cul-de-sac, that there are twists and turns and adventures over the grass verge, but in the end they find a way through. But right now, plenty of critics, including on their own side, are questioning the navigation and questioning the driver.
Chris, many thanks again. Chris Mason there, our political editor, with the thoughts there at Westminster tonight. So, as Chris was saying, the Prime Minister says that public spending will not be cut despite the cost of that mini-budget. But investors are still nervous after the Bank of England insisted that its emergency intervention scheme in the bond market, which happened after the mini-budget, would be ending this week. The bank is buying these bonds to stabilise their price and to try to prevent a sale which could put some pension schemes at risk. So let's turn to our business editor, Simon Jack, who's the expert on all these things, to explain a little more about the bonds and what's going on. Simon?
Thanks very much, Huw. Yes, what is this financial market turmoil and what does it mean for you? Well, the big problems, as Huw said, are in the government bond market. So what is a bond? Well, bonds are essentially an IOU from the government. It borrows money from investors. The government promises to pay them back with a bit of interest. They're seen as a super safe investment. It's assumed that the government will always pay its debts back. Now, these bonds are bought and sold. It's a very big market and it's been unusually volatile. Why? Well, last month, the government promised huge tax cuts, you're hearing from Chris there, without explaining exactly how it would pay for them. This means that those IOUs, those bonds, looked riskier. This means investors want more interest to justify that extra risk. So the cost of borrowing, you can see here, really shot up. It rose at its fastest rate over a short period of time ever. So what's that got to do with pensions? Well, they are big buyers of government bonds and they hold on to them typically for years. But some specialist pension fund managers have used them as collateral security to get ready cash now from banks to be able to pay out on those pension promises. Now, when the value of that collateral, that security, starts to plummet, those banks wanted more cash to make sure they didn't end up out of pocket. The pension managers had to sell more bonds to raise that cash, which pushed the prices of bonds even lower. So you've got a selling spiral. The more you sell, the more you have to sell. Enter the Bank of England to try and break that cycle of selling. The Bank of England said it would buy billions of pounds worth of these government bonds off them to stabilise that market. But the bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, said last night it would stop doing this on Friday. Let's have a look at what's happened. It worked at first. You can see here the cost of borrowing came down, but now borrowing costs are heading back up to where they were before the Bank of England intervened. In the last couple of hours, they've come down just a little bit. So how does that affect everyday life? Are pensions safe? Number one question.
The most important thing for people to remember is that these final salary type pensions have £2 trillion of assets standing behind them. So although there's been a lot of turmoil, there's a lot going on under the bonnet, those pensions are safe because there's a lot of money standing behind them and British businesses standing behind the pension fund. So although the headlines are horrible, the pensions are safe.
So pensions are safe, but there's another effect. The cost of government borrowing affects the cost of all borrowing, including mortgages. A year ago, a £200,000 mortgage on a £300,000 home would have cost around 2%. Now, that same mortgage is around 5.7, maybe even nearly 6%, meaning extra borrowing annually of over £7,000 a year. Now, most of that, to be clear, is due to interest rates rising all around the world as banks try and tackle inflation. but between 2,000 and 3,000 of that extra cost was caused, building society bosses tell me, of the government's not so mini budget. And that's a big deal because 1.7 million people will face having to refinance their mortgage over the next 12 months. Huw.
Simon, many thanks again. Simon Jack, our business editor, taking us through lots of the factors involved in the debate that's going on. The Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, has been attending an important meeting of finance ministers in Washington, facing more questions about the market turmoil and the stewardship of British government policy. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, is in Washington with the latest.
Yes, Huw, it's not just that they got the news this morning of a surprise fall in the economy in August. It's not just what you've just been hearing about in terms of that rise in the effective cost of government borrowing. You also had the Bank of England uncompromising in terms of withdrawing its support at the weekend, as we've been hearing. But the Bank of England also, through its chief economist, saying that the biggest economic impact from the energy shock now is not on inflation, but on the public finances. It's clearly passing the ball over to the government to solve this crisis as it phases out its emergency support. But the questions aren't just coming from back home as Kwasi Kwarteng arrives here in Washington for these meetings.
Hi, Chancellor.
Flying into the IMF at a time that costs for the tens of billions the Chancellor is going to borrow have gone sky high. These meetings are ordinarily more about crises in developing countries, but high on the unofficial agenda here is a more awkward question: what is going on in Britain?
I have full confidence in the Bank of England to get inflation back down to target. The MPC has been clear about its intention to do that. Secondly, to safeguard the financial system and take the measures that are necessary. Credibility comes from commitment, clear commitment. It comes from transparency, and it's buttressed by institutions.
The pressure was seen in the markets. The most important form of government borrowing, the 10-year bond, shot up to its highest level, the highest effective interest rate since the financial crisis 14 years ago, above the immediate aftermath of the mini-budget. It fell back after the bank intervened, one of its last. The Eurozone has been no stranger to crisis and faces its own energy challenges, but the president of the Eurozone finance ministers, Pascal Donohoe, from Ireland, expressed his confidence that the Chancellor would sort out the problems.
Oh, I think it's far too early to be able to draw comparisons between the difficulties of the global financial crisis and anything that could possibly happen within the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is a G7 economy with their own currency, and it's absolutely obvious in all of the public statements that have been made by the Bank of England, by the government of the United Kingdom, that they're aware of developments that are taking place.
But to be clear, your approach in Ireland and in the Eurozone hasn't been to make unfunded tax cuts with tens of billions of borrowing.
Well, we've taken a different approach within Ireland. We've also made the decision not to borrow for any new measures. So we're in a situation at the moment that our finances are currently in surplus.
President Zelensky, we are all ears.
There are some very big challenges in the world economy posed by the war in Ukraine. No one here really wants to be talking about the UK, but it is happening.
Well, let's join Faisal once again. Faisal, in your view, what's the nature of the pressure that is now on the Chancellor, given the voices we've heard today, to consider a change of course?
Well, the Chancellor's been in meetings with the world's most important finance ministers, the G7, his debut on this world stage. And we do understand that there were some comments in general about the dangers of unfunded tax cuts, the danger to financial instability. And I had heard in private from some of the people around that table that what they were concerned by was not necessarily someone taking a different policy avenue, but when there's clear issues in the markets, the fact that a government doubles down on that. That was what was puzzling people at a place like this. And so the question really being asked, not just here, but also domestically and in the markets, is when you have a Prime Minister publicly ruling out spending cuts, ruling out tax rises, but also saying borrowing is going to be under control, well, you don't need an advanced degree in mathematics to work out that there's something that needs to move there. Something that could be U-turned on, but what exactly? And can it be done in a way that's economically credible and politically viable?
Faisal, many thanks again. Faisal Islam there at those talks in Washington. And by the way, for more updates, news and analysis from Faisal and Simon Jack and other colleagues, head to BBC News Online. That's bbc.co.uk/news. You can get the same content, of course, as well by using the BBC News app. Manchester Crown Court has heard that a nurse charged with the murder of 7 babies sent a sympathy card to the parents of one of the babies she'd killed. Lucy Letby is also charged with attempting to murder 10 other babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 and 2016. She denies all of the 22 charges set against her. Our correspondent Judith Moritz has the latest.
Holding one of the babies in her care, Lucy Letby smiles for the camera. But today she was described in court as persistent, calculated and cold-blooded, deliberately sabotaging poorly and premature babies in the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital. It's alleged that she attacked one baby after another until a pattern began to emerge.
I'm Dr. Ravi Jayaram. I'm a consultant paediatrician and I've worked for the NHS all my career.
The jury heard that this paediatrician who worked with her had started to notice the coincidence between several unexplained deaths and medical emergencies and the presence of Lucy Letby.
The court was told that one night Dr. Jayaram realised that Nurse Letby was on her own with a very premature newborn baby, that he felt uncomfortable about it given his concerns, and so he went to find her. When he entered the room, he found Lucy Letby standing over the incubator. The baby's oxygen levels were falling dangerously, but the monitor alarms hadn't sounded as they should have been, and the jury was told that Lucy Letby had made no efforts to help the baby or to call for assistance.
Prosecuting Nicholas Johnson KC told the jury that the doctor found the baby's chest wasn't moving and her breathing tube had become dislodged. Lucy Letby is charged with the baby's attempted murder. She watched from the dock as Mr Johnson said it was highly significant that children in her care persistently and consistently suffered emergencies. He said, sometimes the evidence of her hand at work is more obvious than others, and it's remarkable that on many occasions when children who'd suffered unexpected, spectacular and life-threatening collapses were removed from her orbit, they had exceptional recoveries. The court heard that in 1 week, Lucy Letby had tried to kill 3 babies. One of them, known as Baby I, was said to have been resilient, with a nurse trying 3 times to murder her and succeeding on the 4th occasion. Then the court heard she sent a condolence card to that baby's parents, something she later told police she knew wasn't normal, though she'd kept an image of the card on her phone. Lucy Letby denies all the charges she faces. Her defence team are expected to outline their case tomorrow. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Manchester.
Police searching for a 19-year-old who has not been seen for more than 3 years say that they have found human remains. Leah Croucher disappeared while walking to work in Milton Keynes in February 2019. Thames Valley Police say that they have launched a murder investigation. Our correspondent Joe Black is in Milton Keynes tonight. Joe, tell us more about what's been going on there today.
Yes, Leah Croucher went missing on the 15th of February 2019. She was captured on CCTV just after 8 o'clock in the morning, around half a mile away from where I'm standing talking to you now. And as you might imagine, her parents have done various appeals over the years about her disappearance. So if you drive around the city of Milton Keynes, you can see her image on many posters. In fact, there is one tacked to a tree just a few metres down the road where I'm standing. Now, today at this address here in Milton Keynes, there's been lots of police activity, lots of officers going in and out of these premises here, many of them in forensic suits with specialist equipment. Now, the police told us today that after a tip-off from a member of the public on Monday, they came to search this address. They found Leah's rucksack and other personal possessions. Now, they said today then that they'd launched a murder investigation, and a short time after that announcement, in a statement, they then said that sadly human remains had been discovered. They went on to point out in that statement that it is likely to take some time to formally identify the deceased. But of course, as you can imagine, this will be a hugely anxious time for Leah's friends and family. They are being updated as to what's happening here with the investigation and being supported by officers from Thames Valley Police.
Joe, many thanks again for the update there. Joe Black in Milton Keynes. Now, NHS Blood and Transplant has declared that blood supplies in England are critically low. It says there are just 3 days' worth of stocks overall, but it's even lower for certain blood types. Hospitals are being asked to find ways to manage their supplies. Our health correspondent, Catherine Burns, is with me, has been looking at this. And Catherine, what are the main reasons people are giving for the shortages?
Huw, you might expect when you hear about blood shortages that it's down to a lack of donors coming forward. That's not the issue here. The main problem is staff shortages. So we're talking about donor carers. They're the people who put the needles in your arms and look after you when you give blood. NHS Blood and Transplant says that more of them are leaving than normal and that they're having problems recruiting behind them. This has been an ongoing problem since the pandemic. Now, today there's actually been a surge in the number of people coming forward offering to donate blood, but many of them will be struggling to get appointments because right now across England there are only a handful of cities with more than 50 appointment slots over the whole of this week. And the priority is to make sure those slots go to existing donors with O negative or O positive blood, because they only have around 2 days supply of that. To give you context, they normally like to have about 6 days at a time. All this means that hospitals are being asked to limit their blood use. That's the first time this has happened since the late 1990s. Now, this isn't going to affect emergency care or cancer care, but we could see about 1% of all operations being cancelled. It'll be elective surgery, things like hip replacements. And this is not the news that 6.8 million people on waiting lists right now will want to hear.
OK, Catherine, many thanks again. Catherine Burns there, our health correspondent. Now, the Nigerian authorities say that more than 500 people are known to have died in flooding there, flooding that's ravaged the country in recent weeks. Experts say the floods during this year's rainy season are the worst in over a decade. 1.5 million people have also been displaced and moved from their homes. President Putin has accused the West of causing the global energy crisis, suggesting that damage to the Nord Stream gas pipeline was the result of international terrorism. Mr. Putin was speaking at a conference in Moscow where he claimed that the Americans wanted to replace Russia as a supplier of energy to Europe. Mr. Putin is under increasing pressure at home and abroad, as our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has been considering now the options available to the Russian leader.
What will Vladimir Putin do next in Ukraine? What is he thinking? His special military operation has not gone according to plan. But U-turns, that's not his style.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
This is,
Спасибо. Прошу вас.
At an event in Moscow, classic Putin. The Kremlin leader painting Russia as the victim and the authorities in Kiev as terrorists. Keep in mind, though, that it was Russia that invaded Ukraine.
I don't follow them.
Konstantin Remchukov's newspaper has criticised Russian officials for nuclear saber-rattling during the special operation. He says Putin wants a new world order and don't expect de-escalation anytime soon.
He is authoritarian leader of a nuclear power. He is unchallenged leader in this country. And he has some strong beliefs and perceptions which drive him crazy, and he started to believe that this is existential.
Would Putin really go nuclear in Ukraine? He's dropped unsubtle hints. Days before the Russian invasion, the president oversaw massive nuclear drills. He's since warned the West he's not bluffing about the nuclear option. In Putin's mind, for him, defeat is unimaginable.
If you'd run a country for 22 years like Vladimir Putin has, and if you'd silenced all your critics and crushed the opposition like Putin has, you may well feel, like Putin appears to feel, that you will always end up a winner. To acknowledge that any other outcome is possible means facing up to an unpalatable fact that you are not invincible.
And in a country with no checks or balances, and where the leaders don't feel accountable to the public, there are few constraints on Kremlin decision-making.
The problem is that the system which was created in these 30 years didn't create the society. There is a lot of very nice people in Russia. I think you met them, but there is no civil society. That's why Russia can't resist.
For now, resistance to the Kremlin is coming from Ukraine and the West. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
A report into baby loss and maternity set to be published tomorrow says there's a lack of support for families from diverse backgrounds. The all-party parliamentary group on baby loss underlines the shortage of specially trained staff to deal with the needs of women from different ethnic backgrounds. For many in the South Asian community, for example, the loss of a baby is often treated as a taboo subject. Our correspondent Shabnam Mahmood reports now.
This is when we took him home.
Oh, okay.
So this is the most recent photo of him before he passed.
Dylan was just 12 weeks old when he died from a heart condition. The death left his mother Jazz devastated.
This is his section, and we always make sure we have fresh flowers. Sometimes for me, I felt like a failure. Like I was responsible for countless people's grief, you know. And I think to a certain extent I still feel like that. Although a lot of people say to me, you know, it wasn't your fault, like your immediate family, you just don't know what wider family think. We wrapped him in his baby blanket.
Although close family and friends were supportive, Jazz says baby loss in the South Asian community is rarely openly discussed. She sought help from the hospital's bereavement support, but after months of waiting, that help proved inadequate.
I had to educate my bereavement counsellor on issues within our culture, and obviously that was a whole half an hour that probably didn't need to happen.
When it's a baby loss, it's a different. They disappear. Yeah, it's different. It's like no. Jazz has now joined a support group for South Asian women to openly discuss their experiences. It's led by Madhuri Bedi, who also lost 2 babies.
They need that acknowledgement from their families. They need to be able to put pictures out if they want to. They need to be able to say that baby's name. That is so important. And then they need to get support.
Jazz recently gave birth to a baby boy called Milan.
I'm a mother of 2. You know, I'm not a mother of 1, and just because you know you can only see one doesn't mean that there is one.
And she has this advice for bereaved mums.
Talk about your experience, talk about what's happened, and you know, don't be shy. Don't be shy to talk. You know, people are there to listen, and that's the only way we're going to kind of break down barriers. See, number 9 is the day that Dylan was born, and 14 was the day Milan was born.
Shabnam Mahmood, BBC News.
The rugby union side Wasps, one of the most successful sides in English club rugby and a familiar presence in the game since 1867, have been suspended from the Premiership. They say it's likely that they will enter into administration in the coming days. It's another major blow for English domestic rugby after Worcester were placed into administration last month. Now, in tonight's football, Rangers were defeated 7-1 by Liverpool at Ibrox, with Mo Salah coming off the bench to score a hat-trick within 5 minutes, the fastest in the history of the Champions League. Natalie Perks tells us more.
Is Ibrox literally bouncing? But a glancing header from a corner just 7 minutes later took the wind from was rounded off with a 7th for Harvey Elliott. On the night, Liverpool ran.
Time is 10:30. Louise is here with the weather. Hi, Louise.
Hi there, Hugh. We've seen some beautiful autumn sunshine just recently, haven't we? And this was the south coast in Hampshire today. Now, there was quite a lot of cloud around, but if you had the sunshine, absolutely glorious. 19 degrees the high. But you can also see how parched the ground is. What you need is some rain, and you might actually get some over the next few hours. Some of it quite heavy at the moment, pushing up through the Isles of Scilly across Cornwall. It's going to chiefly stay towards the Channel Isles and just hug on to the Channel coast. But it may well linger for a time first thing in the morning across Essex and Kent. So clearing by dawn, and with that blanket of cloud around here, temperatures are going to hold up. So what a contrast, double figures first thing tomorrow morning. A milder start. By contrast, further north under those clearer skies, chilly touch of frost likely here. So yes, we've got that early morning rain clearing quite quickly in actual fact, and the cloud will break up and the sunshine come through. And once again, for many, some lovely autumn sunshine around, even across eastern Scotland. Yes, we've got some wet and windy weather pushing into the far northwest, and temperatures here a little bit more subdued. But once again, temperatures likely to peak widely into the mid-teens. But from Friday into the weekend, it's all about low pressure starting to dominate the story. The winds are going to pick up as well, quite brisk winds, gusts 40-50 miles an hour. They're going to drive plenty of showers into the far north and west on Friday. Fewer showers across England and Wales. On the whole, not a bad day. And once again, temperatures quite widely peaking at around 11 to 17 Celsius. But into the weekend, don't forget that low. It looks likely that it's going to be a case of sunny spells, plenty of frequent showers and blustery winds to go with it as well. So keep that umbrella close at hand. You might just need it. Huw.
OK, we're listening. OK, Louise, thanks very much. That's BBC News at 10 on Wednesday, the 12th of October. More analysis coming up, of course, as usual, over on BBC Two, because Kirsty Walk is standing by with Newsnight and just about to go on air. Here on BBC One, all of our colleagues in the nations and regions standing by, as they are every night, with the news where you are. But from all of the 10 team, thanks for watching and good night.